So, what Europe should contribute to the world new paradigm? Qui sommes-nous? Us Europeans and European nations, who are we? Who are we? Europe. Of course, one can jump on one's chair like a young goat, saying, Europe, Europe, Europe. But it leads to nowhere and signifies nothing. This is what General de Gaulle provocatively said in an interview given on December 14, 1965. Some still today argue that in reacting in that way, de Gaulle was only concerned by France's political great design and prestige, while others pretend that he was mainly inspired by commercial and economic motivations, especially agricultural, a conception of protectionist national interests raised against all other nations. Both are wrong. It is now key for European nations to ask themselves why, because it raises a question of what are we, of what are, for real, a nation state and a world region like Europe, like Western Europe, for what purpose we do exist. It is the first issue to raise, to muster a sense of mission, to realize with what we could and should contribute to the new world paradigm, which is our world land bridge. To identifying this source is indeed key to understand what could and should spring from it. All the more that it's precisely de Gaulle who, after recognition of the Popular Republic of China in January 1964, declared quite prophetically what nobody was then capable to foresee, except a few persons in this room, where I throw my eyes at. De Gaulle said, "It is not excluded that China is once again going to become what it has been for past centuries, the greatest power in the universe." What de Gaulle rejected was a supranational institution and a pseudo-federal model of integration launched against the very principle of the nation states. He understood that solidarity, as opposed to what happens in the present European Union, means to have a common mission and not to undermine the national sovereignties, to found solidarity in a mutual understanding. He told the following to his press secretary, Alain Perfit: "What the Anglo-Saxons want is a Europe without shores, a Europe that would no longer have the ambition to be itself, a Europe without borders, Europe à l'anglaise, British Europe, a Europe in which each European country, to start with ours, would lose its soul." The key word here is the word soul, because if Europe could contribute today to the new Silk Road and the world land bridge, it is with the soul of each and all of its nations, the soul of its men composers, thinkers, and poets and philosophers, with their science, their art, and their technologies, and not with the sterile product of a monetarist bureaucracy. De Gaulle, in that sense, was definitely and absolutely pro-European. In the same interview about the young goat, the famous young goat interview, so often misquoted, he said, "As long as I am French, I am an European. Given the fact that we are here in Europe, and I would have to say that France has always been an essential, if not capital part of Europe, given the fact that we are here in Europe, therefore I am, of course, an European. Our countries have their history," he said, "their language, their way of life, and they are French, German, Italian, British," he even said British, "Deutsch, Belgian, Spanish, Luxembourgese. They are countries that we have to progressively accustom to live and act together. In that sense, I am the first one to recognize and think that our common market is essential, because if we manage to organize it and consequently to establish a real economic solidarity among our European nations, we'll have made a lot for the fundamental coming together of the people and for the community of our life. And he added in a speech given in Bonn on June 11-12, 1965, same year, "We Europeans are builders of cathedrals." It took us a long time, a very long time. We have made a lot of efforts, but we have started to succeed. Anyway, there is a foundation. It is a reconciliation of France and Germany. The pillars are our 6 members of the European Economic Community. There is going to be a top made of the arches and the roof, and it's going to be our political cooperation. The pillars are built after the foundation is fixed. The top is going to be settled when the pillars are going to be properly built. When our cathedral will be built, it is going to be open to others. Who knows if, with them, when we will have acquired a taste for building, we are not going to build an even greater and more beautiful cathedral, the union of the whole Europe. De Gaulle, already in the middle of World War II, on November 11, 1942, had invited Europeans to join together in a practical and lasting fashion. It is key to understand this concept. Of course, things have changed a lot since the 40s and the 60s of the past century, but the challenge remains the same and is even much more clear today. There are 2 traps. The first is to think that there is an issue leading to the past as such, a withdrawal towards a nation in itself, a fixed model of a nation. The second trap is to submit our nations to an European Union which has become a tool for a one-world monetarism ruled by money fakers like Mario Draghi through the euro, the financial institutions of this fake Europe, and NATO. Both mean a submission to the ruling financial oligarchy, the ideology and financial power of the British Empire with its somehow Anglo-American new skin, the very reason why de Gaulle vetoed the British admission to the European Union. It is very important to understand this point for our American and Chinese friends. It means a Europe breaking away from the geopolitical rule to be truly itself, and it means European nation-states joining their efforts for common projects and therefore not submitting to refusing that geopolitical rule, either one by one or together. And this has to be understood. The problem is your geopolitical rule. It's not to be one by one or together. It should be clear that the present-day European Union is based on a treason. Our European Union is based on a treason of all what we mean, a treason of the best historical and cultural sources of Europe. And I mean sources, and not clinging to roots clinging in the ground. But it should also be clear that the European nations and their leaders, and their so-called populist opponents as well, have also given away their souls. Therefore, where is hope? What could be and should be our European contribution? It is obviously in the sense of an understanding, a deep understanding of what a nation-state is, something which is, even if concealed, latent in the hearts of us all Europeans. Our task is to inspire the awakening from the sleep of reason. A nation-state is much more than a territory or a given state of the population, or even a religion or a tradition. A nation-state is the dynamics of an idea evolving and rising its power and scope through history. Friedrich Schiller, Heinrich Heine, François Rabelais, Miguel Cervantes, Dante Alighieri, Alexander Pushkin, Percy B. Shelley, or for the best, Adam Mickiewicz and Victor Hugo brought forth this idea in their writings, as many poets did in their own ways. This idea is dynamic, as all ideas are, and it is its political embodiment, which I'm convinced is our best contribution to the New World paradigm. If you are inspired in that way, you start to understand the Confucian tradition of China, and you don't fall in the traps of geopolitics or monetarism. Great minds always tend to coincide on many issues. In the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648, we have this conception of the advantage of the other, and in the preamble of the American Constitution, the pursuit of happiness, the same conception of happiness developed by President Xi Jinping, a happiness that it is only possible to reach for oneself if you give its possibility to the other. This demands to have something to contribute. This demands to proceed for us all Europeans to a profound heart-searching, what they call in French an examen de conscience, a profound heart-searching, because the way towards reason goes always through the heart. This effort of ours, understood by the Chinese, would be the best way to respond to the challenge of the Belt and Road Initiative. Building out of the present European Union, out of the Euro, and out of NATO. Building a true Europe of the nation states, like de Gaulle said, from the Atlantic to the Urals, and now, well beyond, connecting the Atlantic with the Sea of China on one side, and to a renaissance American on the other, should and would be an educational for the world that we could give to the world, the very basis to articulate the great world land bridge. Making that effort would get us out of the ideology that success can only be made at the expense of the other. And I meet a lot of young people who think that. So we should get out of this ideology. That success can only be made at the expense of the other, with expectation that the winner takes all. And the Chinese would appreciate that we understand that. We'll also get us out of the silly idea that the new Silk Road is good because it is a tool against the United States. And the Chinese would appreciate that this is understood. The visit of President Trump to China has proven that the Chinese authorities fight for a community of development among all nations because they understand that their interest coincides with the interests of them all, which was yesterday stressed by Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Our work here in Europe should be to leave the cultural pessimism of geopolitics and financial greed and revive those moments, like in our great Renaissance, where we tried to contribute to making a republic, reaching to the shores of America to get free from the grip of the European oligarchy. In that sense, our contribution should be to recover our own history and rediscover how we brought our revolutions in science and art. It is a recovery of our soul. It means to get rid of a self-destructive Eurocentrism, to bring to the world the gift of a true internationalism, freed both from a narcissistic nationalism and a cosmopolitanism of financial slave herders. To understand and joyfully share with the others the fact that Europe could only exist because, between the fall of the Roman Empire and our great Renaissance, there have been remarkable achievements in other parts of the world, mainly in China, but also in India, Cambodia, and parts of Africa. In that sense, we have to understand, to make our contribution fruitful, we have to understand that we ourselves have other sources in our civilization than the Greek or Judeo-Christian. It doesn't mean to underrate those fundamental contributions, Greek and Jew Christian contributions, but on the contrary, to realize that other contributions are not only key for the world to come, but also substantial to our own identity. Europe has been built also from outside, not only from within its own European territory. For example, without the visitors from China that came to meet Toscanelli at the times of the 15th century Council of Florence, America should have probably been discovered by us Europeans much, much later, and the cause of freedom against the oligarchy at least temporarily lost. Today, the Belt and Road Initiative, together with the existence of the BRICS, is not only a network of infrastructural projects, economic institutions, and fast-speed trains. It's much more. It's a change of paradigm, not only Chinese, even inspired by China, but universal, as the Chinese better understand it than us. It is a potential jump from a geopolitical and financial order of exchanges to an order of mutual development based on connections and permanent innovations, and not on annexations and possessions. To understand this, we have to contribute and share with the Chinese the approach of Wolfgang Wilhelm Leibniz to this issue. Starting from the principle of the universality of reason, Leibniz, at the end of the 17th century, notably as Helga mentioned yesterday in his Novissima Sinica, not only concludes that the Christian revelation theology and Chinese natural theology of Confucianism are compatible, but that it is necessary to launch an economic, scientific, and cultural cooperation between the two more developed parts of Eurasia at the time, Western Europe and China. He writes, and I remember it to you because it's a key moment of history, a specific arrangement of the providence, according to my opinion, has made that the highest culture and ornament of the human race are today somehow concentrated at the two extremities of our continent, Europe and China. The latter, as the Europe of the Orient, embellishes the opposed side of the earth, which is our side. Leibniz considered that the Europeans are more advanced in the science of non-physical and metaphysical speculations on geometry considered from the standpoint of philosophy, while the Chinese have a better management of practical philosophy and rules of life. Hence, the Belgian Jesuit Ferdinand Verbiest taught the Emperor Kan He in European sciences, trigonometry, and astronomical mathematics, so much that the emperor became a very highly learned man, looking at geometry from the standpoint of philosophy and not mere craftsmanship, not mere Euclidean craftsmanship, and composed a book to promote the principles of such a beautiful science to the children of China. The Jesuit priests sent to China, among others by the French monarch, were organized by Leibniz to share more generally his knowledge with the Chinese literate elite, the communication of ideas, accompanying, of course, the exchange of goods. But for Leibniz, this was not a one-way relation. He points both seriously and ironically that the state of affairs among us seems to me such through the overflow of corruption, the corruption of Europe, that it would seem almost necessary that the Chinese should send us missionaries to teach us the use and practice of natural theology, as well as we send them some to teach them the revealed theology. Europe should contribute to deepen the knowledge on both sides of this first draft of a 17th century land bridge and Silk Road, global Silk Road, with both physical and mental exchanges. A good lesson for us all, is to understand how this mission was historically killed. And it's something that goes to the very roots of what we should contribute to the world today, to understand why this was not made possible as something changing the direction of history. First, by the ultramontanes of Rome, who refused to admit that the Ren and the Li, the idea of a sovereign universal good, could be compatible with the spirit of Christianity. And second, by the brutal assault of the British Empire, seconded, as Victor Hugo denounced it, by the French, notably through the Opium Wars and the murderous gunboat diplomacy and plunder. This shared historical knowledge should contribute to avoid repeating our mistake. So we should repeat our mistakes. That will be our part of our contribution, our mistakes of the past, to then consider our relations always with the eyes of the future. There are, of course, many areas of cooperation now, but on a far limited way. On the history of science, looking for what we Europeans can bring, there is a common study of the works of Vernadsky, the German and Russian schools of cosmic and astronomic sciences, the Italian school of hydrodynamics, the French development of laser fusion. Concretely, there is a lot to share, provided there is a political will and not an ideological mistrust. I was told so many times that if the scientists organize their own channels of communication, they do work very happily together, because science does not belong to one single country, but to us all in the process of building a much better world. However, the problem in all ventures is that there is no collaboration on the part of the European administrations, which too often think in terms of the Chinese situation of 5 to 10 years ago, at best, without taking into consideration the enormous advance accomplished by China in the last years. The French seem to be even more bureaucratically paralyzed than the Germans. There are presently about 5,000 Chinese doctoral and PhD students in Germany, while only 500 to 600 in France. The last Franco-Chinese Science Commission took place 6 years ago, and the visits of scientific supervisors on both sides were less than 5 in the last 10 years. The worst is the censorship of many initiatives by security and defense services on our side, and the lack of a long-term strategy of cooperation. Of course, France, for example, has 2 projects in the aerospace sector with China. SFOSAT, a satellite to be launched in 2018, next year, for the observation of the oceans, and SVOM, set for 2020, for the observation of pulses of gamma rays. The French project, Cardiospace, has been embedded in the Tiangong-2 Chinese space mission. But of course, all this is far, far from what we could and should contribute. My fight is to launch an area of common and far-reaching cooperation at a Franco-Chinese and mainly European-Chinese levels for an actually ambitious space policy, the blossoming of an oceanic blue economy, the Blue Economy Cluster, and the development of Africa. Together, we have this mission to develop Africa and throw through the windows the last remnant of colonialism and neocolonialism. All that cannot be decided or arranged at a French or European level from bottom up. A strategy from top down, vertically promoted within our abstract tactique approach. So it's a strategy from top down, but with an abstract tactique approach on the ground, is needed to contribute in a crossroads type of exchange of ideas, research, innovations, and goods, which has to be reached to establish a community of development and world peace. The emergence of China is for us Europeans the opportunity to open our eyes and look at ourselves and lift our heads instead of walking on them. It will make us happy. It will make us happy. Like all these Chinese children who are inhabited, as you have seen them, by joyful curiosity, and all those from the Yemeni BRICS youth cabinet that we saw yesterday. The challenge is for us adults to care for them, being rationally and wholeheartedly proud of our nations, proud once again, proud to work together for a future based on a community of principles, solidarity, and peace. Let's stop crawling egoistically from the past, and we do crawl egoistically from the past in Europe these days, and leap ahead towards a future to rediscover and recover our souls, the souls of both Europe and our nations. It is for us, true Europeans and true patriots, our mandatory contribution, inspired by our past history of world citizens. It is about time now to be human, fully human, as patriots and world citizens. Thank you.